In this section, we're looking at human-caused changes in the environment. These include nutrient enrichment, accumulation of toxins, climate change, and ozone depletion, and we'll take each one in turn. Nutrient enrichment, we're not actually just talking about nutrients, we're also talking about toxins or any other materials that humans are moving from one area to another. So this picture shows a bird that's been exposed to an oil spill. So this is a fossil fuel that's been pumped out of the earth and shipped somewhere on a boat, and there was a breach in the boat, and there was an oil spill, and it got into the bird's feathers. The bird will sink if it gets too heavy. And it's not healthy for its, it'll clean its feathers, and that could kill it as well. Okay, another thing that will move around are crops or fertilizers. So when you have farmland and you harvest the crops to bring to a supermarket to feed people, you're actually moving all the nutrients with the crop, right? So the carbon, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the hydrogen, the oxygen, all the stuff that's in the crop is going to be moving and transported to the grocery store and then into you. Fertilizer at the other end, nitrogen and phosphorus and other nutrients are added into the soil. And those are often from fossil fuels, which are dug up in one part of the world, transported to a processing facility, and then transported to a farm and spread on the farm to add nutrients to the soil. Critical load is an idea that you should understand. It's the amount of added nutrient that can be absorbed by plants without damaging the ecosystem integrity. This picture is showing when the critical load has been surpassed. So the first thing that happens is this nutrient load up. So let's assume you've got this barn here. Here's your farm. Anyway, here's the farmland, and it rains, and the nitrogen and phosphorus and whatever other nutrients are in the fertilizer might run off the farmland and into the water. Could also happen from someone's lawn or from phosphorus in detergent and laundry. Anyway, if you're adding too many extra nutrients to the aquatic ecosystem here, anything photosynthetic is going to say, yay, let's do more photosynthesis. And so you'll have algae blooms, and plants are going to do very, very well. And all the photosynthetic stuff, organisms are just going to grow and grow and grow. At some point, though, they die. And decomposition really is just cellular respiration that happens by decomposers, right? And so cellular respiration, you got H6, you've got sugar, or let's say cellulose that can be broken down to sugar, right? And oxygen, and that breaks down into carbon dioxide plus water plus ATP, right, which is cellular respiration. And in this case, we're talking about decomposition. So they take the organic materials, the plants, and they need oxygen, and they break it down, right? And the CO2 is released to the atmosphere. So we'll talk about that later, and they get energy. But let's focus on the oxygen right now. So if these things are reactants, they're getting used up. So that means oxygen levels in the water are going down, and all of the animals need oxygen to live. So what can happen is that there's so much decomposition that the oxygen levels decrease and the animals die there. Here's just a picture of agricultural runoff showing phytoplankton blooms, which can lead to decomposition, which can lead to low oxygen levels. Okay, toxins in the environment. One thing to understand is that humans can produce a lot of toxic chemicals, plastics, lots of other materials that end up, they're things that persist in the environment because they're not known to nature, and so nothing's evolved to break them down. And so these are things that are sometimes toxic to people or to wildlife. And since there's nothing, since they're so new, nothing's evolved to break them down, and these things will persist for thousands of years sometimes. So this term, persist, is something that you should get. So that's just one concern. Another one is biological magnification, which sort of goes with the persistent molecules. And so when you think of magnification, you're thinking about things getting bigger, right? And so they're getting bigger with each successive trophic level. So I'll show you what I mean by that. So here's some molecule, some organic molecule that's persistent in the environment. Could be naphthalene, could be mercury, PCBs, whatever. Something that's toxic, okay? And so toxic stuff in the environment behaves differently than stuff that animals have evolved to use. So let's say that we're looking at the stuff that animals know how to use, right? So let's say we're looking at sugars, right? Carbohydrates. Let's say we're looking at lipids, which are fats, amino acids, nucleic acids like DNA, right? All of these things, animals have enzymes. Plants, everybody, right, has, or decomposers. We all have enzymes that can break this stuff down, and so all of these organisms are going to take this stuff and they'll do cellular respiration with it, right? And at the end of cellular respiration, they'll breathe out their carbon dioxide and their water. There might be some nitrogen from the amino acids and the nucleic acids. They'll pee that stuff out, super duper. And they'll just either use these materials to build up their bodies or they'll use them for energy. And the breakdown product is carbon dioxide or pee, right? That's different than toxic stuff. So toxic stuff like mercury or PCBs, we don't have enzymes to break that down. And so that stuff will absorb onto phytoplankton, which are going to be absorbed onto, which then are going to be eaten by maybe, I don't know, the next level of the ecosystem. So let's say here's phytoplankton, and they have a certain amount of this bad stuff. Well, this fish doesn't have enzymes to break that stuff down. And so it eats more than its body weight, right? And so it can break down all the amino acids and the lipids and all that stuff, but it doesn't break down the toxic stuff. So that stuff is what's shown here in red. That stuff accumulates. And then this guy eats, let's just ignore this one for now. This guy eats more than its body weight in this guy. And so you can see these, the red stuff is the toxic stuff. You can see it just getting more and more and more of it as you go up in each level of the food chain. So at the top of the food chain, a dolphin, for example, eats way more than its body weight in fish right over its lifetime. So it breaks down all of the regular stuff to carbon dioxide, to urea, but it doesn't break down this toxic stuff. And so that tends to build up over time. And that's especially true of these persistent molecules. And so that's all we're saying through this. So in seawater, these persistent molecules stick to phytoplankton. And then the small fish eat the phytoplankton, but they can't be broken down. And when the small fish are eaten by bigger fish or bigger predators, again, it goes up the food chain. So the top of the food chain here has the highest level of these toxic things, of these toxic materials. So if you are trying to limit the amount of toxic stuff that you eat, it's much better to eat something at a low trophic level, like a flounder, than it is to eat anything at a high trophic level. So dolphin, swordfish is another one. Big tuna, like a tuna steak, is another one. Let's see, sharks would be another one to avoid. Okay, so any of these top predators, and if you're interested in a list, you can just Google that. And it's especially important for pregnant women because you're growing a tiny little person, and younger people are much more susceptible to toxic materials than older people are. It's when the brain is getting set up, it's really vulnerable. So keep that in mind as you get older. All right, here's another picture of the same thing. Here's phytoplankton, and we're looking at 0.025 parts per million. So 0.025. ppm means parts per million. So the thing to notice here is you've got 0.025 here. In the zooplankton, right, so phytoplankton would be the photosynthetic folks. Zooplankton, think animals, right? So these are the folks that eat the phytoplankton. Notice that it's up in order of magnitude, right, from 0.02 to 0.1. And then when we go up to the smelts, we're going up another order of magnitude. And then the lake trout, not quite an order of magnitude, but much, much bigger, right? And then if you look at the herring, up to 124 parts per million. So that is biological magnification.